I'm now joined by Martin Flach, who used to be the Alternative Fuels Director at Iveco, but is now paddling his own canoe as a consultant. So he's going to give us a benefit of his lifetime's experience on alternative fuels from a purely independent point of view now, which is always nice. So Martin, you're this afternoon, you're going to be on the environment panel later on, talking about this journey we're on, the perhaps rather high-speed journey, more quicker than some people would like, towards low-emissions, zero-emissions vehicles. The government, local authorities are pushing the industry down this road. Are the vehicles ready? Is the technology ready to put this stuff on the road?
I think it's interesting being here now as an independent. So I'm no longer looking to try and sell my technology to a customer. What's interesting to see as well is there's a lot of technology being shown which is ready at a level of low production. At the Hanover show last year, at the CV show a couple of weeks ago, and here today, we're talking alternative technologies, we're talking alternative fuels, and a lot of stuff is there in theory until you start to dig deeper, and then you find out, well, when's it really available? And there's still a big gap. If I go down to smaller vehicles, the smaller passenger cars, it's great to see the MAN TGE here as a production-ready vehicle. That's sort of getting there. When we start to go above the 3.5 ton segment and get into the medium and even more so the heavy trucks, the alternatives in town are still relatively few and far between. Putting my ex-Iveco hat back on, the gas vehicle is a here and now technology, and I think is probably the best game in town still on heavy Arctic vehicles doing longer distances. On the urban delivery vehicles, I very much agree with the presentation from MAN this morning that the first stepping stone is going to be urban. So be it 18, 26 tonnes where several of the manufacturers are focusing, or down at that 7.5, 12 tonne segment where I know others are looking. That's the area where you're going into the city, where the benefit of a zero emission vehicle will be. Yes. If I'm running on the motorway at steady speed, a zero emission vehicle doesn't actually do much because I can get a very low emission even from an internal combustion engine. Yes. Because of the nature of the job.
Yes, I think there's a lot of people confuse in their minds the CO2 with the NOx and the particulates, and I think maybe not one technology is going to solve both those problems.
No. There's a classic trap that people fall into is talking about air quality and then talking about CO2 emissions. CO2 is an impact for global warming, but it's NOx and particulates which have the impact on local air quality. Paradoxically, when the congestion charging was set up and then revised about 4 or 5 years ago, all of the reductions in congestion charging were based on CO2. And yet London does not have a CO2 problem, London has an air quality problem. And what they should have done at the time was to focus on air quality technologies rather than CO2. Now, it's easy to say that, it's far more difficult to actually use a measure to be able to do that. But using CO2 was just the wrong measure to use to try and improve air quality in London.
Yes. So as you say, I think we're talking about local emissions, local air quality, a zero tailpipe emissions vehicle like a battery electric may be the right way to go. If you're talking about out the open road, it probably isn't, is it?
And where I see it going is that potentially you've got two scenarios, one of which says you use a low carbon vehicle on the open road and then have an easy transshipment to a zero emission vehicle for the urban environment, or you have a vehicle which can be low carbon on the open road and then will be zero emission capable for those 5-10 miles in the city. Now that in other words is some form of hybrid. And I think that type of technology on heavy vehicles is probably going to be the way that we will go, because it's difficult to see how a pure electric or a pure hydrogen vehicle can work on long distance. DAF at the CV show had an electric Arctic. Nice little product, a 4x2, but it's got a range of 100 kilometres.
Yes.
So you could not get from London to Coventry with that vehicle without having to stop at least once and probably twice because you wouldn't be too sure. And so that is not going to be the easy move into electric vehicles. I know recently Germany have just put a piece of overhead catenary up and are doing trials with trucks with pantographs. Will the technology work? Yeah, of course it'll work. I'm old enough to remember trolley buses running around London, and trolley buses worked. The challenge with that technology is the infrastructure cost. From what I understand, for 5 kilometres of motorway, they spent 14 or 15 billion euros to put that wire up.
Wow,
that's a lot of money, and to get that billion or million, might have been million.
I think it must be million.
Million.
That's still a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, and when you then multiply it by the number of kilometres of motorway that you would have to put that system up on, you've got a very big infrastructure cost.
Yes.
And the question then comes, who pays for that?
Yes.
Then in the UK, we add on another little challenge in that we have no overall height requirement. So what height do you put the wire at? In continental Europe, it's easy. The maximum height of the truck is 4 metres, so you set the wire at 4.3, 4.5, whatever the number needs to be.
Yes.
But it's a standardised height.
Yes.
In the UK, where people run at 4.95, if you put the wire at 5 metres, you've got that much gap to the top of a trailer.
Yes.
That would be a little worrying.
Yes.
If you put it higher, then the bridges aren't high enough.
No. And then you've got a huge catenary.
Then you've got a catenary on a smaller vehicle, which would be 1.5 metres or 2 metres high. So there's some fundamental challenges as to how you get that technology to work.
Yes.
And I came up the M1 last night from the M25, and the M1 is a mess at the moment, more so than I remembered it being. So part of the advantage of not driving up and down the M1 every day is you don't have to get involved in that mess. But it's a real mess. To imagine and they're just basically changing the central barrier. To imagine trying to wire up the motorway network and the disruption that will cause, it's just unbelievable. And I struggle to see a benefit against the cost and the disruption, and a government who will ever pay for that.
No, I agree.
So I think we have to look at other technologies. And to my mind, the vehicle on the long distance road needs to be as much as possible autonomous. But at the same time, we need to solve the problem of urban air quality.
Yes. I mean, Iveco was very heavily committed to the gas engine, that project. We had the MEN Alternative Fuels guy in earlier on, and they're very wedded to battery electric or diesel. He didn't even think hybrids had a much of a future. Is gas, do you think, is an intermediate technology for the next 5-10 years, which will be superseded by something else later on? I
think gas is probably a transient technology. If I look at 2040, 2050, I don't think gas will have disappeared, but I think it will have reduced. I think what we will see is a move to gas while we wait for something better to come along.
Yes.
Everyone talks hydrogen and says hydrogen is the answer. The challenge on hydrogen is the energy density is very low. You need a lot of space to store much hydrogen. If you're at Hanover, you will have seen that Iveco and Fiat Powertrain Technologies did a hydrogen fuel cell concept, and it was basically a 4x2 Arctic without a cab on it. And will it work? Yeah, of course it'll work. What was the range? It was about a couple of 100 kilometres on a 4x2. Now, you need more than that, and you need it on a 6x2 to be able to actually replace that diesel engine or the gas engine for a vehicle operating in the UK.
Yes. I mean, is this going to the problem for the foreseeable future with electric vehicles, battery electrics? Is that the range versus the payload?
Yeah.
The equation still doesn't stack up. Are you talking about a 60-mile range? It's for most commercial operations.
There are very few operations where that will work. If you looked at the publicity that Tesla put out for their Tesla Semi, they were talking about a 500-mile range. Then when you look at their energy use per kilometre and therefore the number of kilowatt hours they're having on that vehicle, and you do an approximation of battery weight, you need 2 vehicles to do the job of 1. And that's being generous. It might even be 3. The payload of that vehicle would be very poor. The economics then becomes a completely different thing as well. They were showing an economics which might work with a single vehicle, but not replacing with 3 vehicles, which is what you would need to do the job. So there are challenging times. Things are moving. Just over the last few years, we are seeing the price of electric vehicles come down. I had a very interesting discussion with one of the operators for an article which I've written for Motor Transport, where his view was that not only the total cost of operation of the vehicle needs to be even, but the capital cost of the vehicles needs to be even to the capital cost of a diesel vehicle. And I guess that's going to happen in 2 ways. One is that the cost of alternatives is coming down and will continue to come down. But also, as the diesel vehicle becomes less and less popular and the volumes go down and down, and the regulation probably becomes tighter and tighter, the price of a diesel vehicle will inevitably rise. And at some point, they will get to a parity. And that's when it really gets interesting.
I mean, my concern is, are there enough battery manufacturers, enough lithium in the world? Because we're going to be talking a lot of batteries if we move into zero emissions by 2050, aren't we?
The challenge will be that with the current technology, with lithium-ion technology, there are a limited number of lithium sources available. They're largely controlled by the Chinese. So all the current hoo-ha about Huawei and 5G is probably far less of a problem to the industry than the risk that the Chinese take all of the lithium for use in China and don't make any available to the rest of the world. I'd be more worried about that. Will other technologies come along that don't require lithium? Probably. Battery development is getting a lot of research at the moment, and there are a lot of very clever people in universities coming up with some very clever things. So we will see differences. I attended a conference at the Royal Society earlier this year with some very clever chemists as well, who are working on how to take waste streams and convert them into fuels, synthetic fuels, which can be very clean burning, very low well-to-wheel carbon, and very low NOx, very low particulates. And there are some really interesting potentials there as well, which could mean that the internal combustion compression ignition engine isn't dead.
No. It's all very interesting, and it's still at a very theoretical level, and yet the regulators want you to start adopting this technology tomorrow, and you just see there's a big gap in the realistic expectations.
Over the run-up to Easter, when Extinction Rebellion were creating a bit of a chaos or demonstration in London, their view was the world UK should be zero carbon by 2025. And much as I applaud their desire and their ambition, it's not actually a possible target. The 2040, 2050 targets which are being talked about are already challenging. I know that Sadiq Khan for London has said he wants to do zero emissions within the congestion charging zone by 2025. And again, on passenger car, that's probably challenging but possible. On heavy commercial vehicle, I don't believe the industry is at a state of production readiness to be able to supply enough vehicles to feed London in what is literally 5-6 years' time.
I think a lot of this stuff is getting to the stage of dogma now, because the environmental air pollution issue is only at certain times of the day in London. It's not all day and all night. And it needs a much more intelligent approach, to my mind, rather than
one of
banning.
the approaches can be to actually make the day longer and actually let vehicles come in at night with appropriate controls and checks and balances to ensure that vehicles which meet a quiet target with a driver who will also drive it in a quiet way and not slam the door and leave the radio on full blast, comes into London in the middle of the night with quiet roll cages. We did it during the Olympics. It's been demonstrated to be possible.
Yes.
We should extend that much further to get to the point where we can take some of the worst of the traffic pollution out of that congested rush hour period.
Yes.
A vehicle, when it's moving, is not emitting anything like the emissions as when it's standing still.
No. Congestion is the worst thing.
Congestion is our worst enemy. If we can take the congestion out, we actually solve we go towards solving a problem.
Big step forward. I agree. Martin, thank you very much indeed.
You're very welcome.
Enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you
Good
very
chat
much.
as always.
Yeah, good. Thank you.